When the British archaeologist Howard Carter discovered Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, the world was dazzled by gold. Antechambers filled with golden chariots, gilded couches, and chests overflowing with unimaginable treasures. And at the heart of it all, a solid gold coffin holding the most famous pharaoh in history. For a century, this has been the story we all know. A story of splendor, of a boy king resting peacefully for 3,000 years. But that's not the whole story. Because hidden beneath all that gold, covering practically everything, was a dark and very sticky puzzle. In the final moments of the king's funeral, ancient Egyptian priests didn't just seal his tomb. They took bucketfuls of a black, tar-like substance and poured it all over the boy king's golden coffins. They poured so much that the coffins were cemented together into a solid block. Worse still, they drenched his mummified body in the same material, fusing priceless, sacred amulets directly to his skin and hardening the bandages into a nightmarish shell. To the discoverers, it seemed like a bizarre, catastrophic mistake. An act of desecration, almost. But now, thanks to modern science, the truth is finally being pieced together. And it's more shocking than anyone ever imagined. This seemingly destructive act, this black goo, wasn't about destruction at all. It was the key to eternal life. The discovery, a tomb of gold and a sticky black problem. To understand this mystery, we have to go back to that moment of discovery.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
The Valley of the Kings, November 1922. After years of fruitless searching, funded by his patron Lord Carnarvon, Howard Carter and his team found a hidden step cut into the valley floor. It was the entrance to a tomb, its seals miraculously intact. After clearing a long, descending passage, Carter made a tiny hole in the doorway. He held up a candle, and as his eyes adjusted, Carnarvon asked impatiently, "Can you see anything?" Carter's reply became legendary. "Yes, wonderful things." The antechamber was a treasure house. Golden couches, dismantled chariots gleaming with gold leaf, and sentinel statues of the king himself. It took Carter's team weeks to meticulously catalog and clear this first room. Beyond it lay the burial chamber, dominated by a colossal golden shrine. But this was only the first layer of a giant puzzle. Inside that shrine was a second, then a third, and finally a fourth, each one nested inside the other. Finally, after months of painstaking work, they reached the massive stone sarcophagus. With immense effort, the heavy lid was raised. Inside was a stunning sight, a coffin in the shape of the king, covered in gold leaf. But as the team tried to lift it, they hit a snag. It wouldn't budge. They soon discovered why. The space between this outer coffin and the next one was filled with a hardened, black, pitch-like substance. When Carter finally managed to open the first coffin, he found the second, even more exquisitely decorated. But it too was stuck fast to the final, innermost coffin. The priests had poured so much of this black liquid, what Carter described as some 2 buckets full, that it had solidified into a powerful cement. The team had to resort to a complex system of pulleys and even heat to try and separate them, risking damage at every turn. It coated the golden coffins, pooled and hardened, and locked the king into his eternal sleep with an almost aggressive finality. For Carter, it was a practical nightmare. He identified the substance as some kind of ritual resin or unguent, but he was baffled by the sheer, excessive amount of it. He saw it as an obstacle, but to the ancient priests, this troublesome black goo was an essential part of the king's journey to the afterlife. The initial question for the excavators was simple. Why was it applied so carelessly, so excessively, that it seemed to do more harm than good? The answer would only become clear when they finally reached the mummy itself.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
Unwrapping the king, a treasure trove fused to the body. On October 28, 1925, nearly 3 years after the tomb was opened, the team was ready to face the king. The innermost coffin, made of over 110 kilograms of solid gold, was opened. There lay Tutankhamun, his head and shoulders covered by that magnificent golden death mask. But below the mask, a far less beautiful sight awaited them. The royal mummy was almost entirely black. The same goo that had cemented the coffins together had been poured liberally over the king's body. It had saturated the linen bandages, hardening them into a solid, brittle shell. The gentle process of unwrapping a mummy was impossible. Carter and his chief anatomist, Dr. Douglas Derry, were faced with a grim task. As they began their difficult work, they realized the situation was even more complex. Embedded within the blackened, hardened layers of linen were around 150 sacred objects, a treasure trove of spiritual armor designed to protect him on his journey through the underworld. There were golden bands, a vulture goddess collar, and sacred amulets to ward off evil. But the black resin had created a terrible dilemma. This ritual liquid had hardened like stone, fusing these priceless jewels directly to the king's fragile, mummified skin. Carter had to make a choice. Preserve the mummy and leave the artifacts unstudied, or sacrifice the integrity of the king's body to retrieve the treasures. He chose the treasures. The process that followed was, by modern standards, brutal. The team used hot knives to try and melt the resin, and chisels to pry the objects free. In the process, the king's body was dismembered. His head and limbs were detached from his torso. It was a destructive act born from the strange actions of ancient priests. The black goo was a puzzle within a puzzle. It was both a preservative and, upon discovery, a destructive agent. For decades, the focus remained on the gold, the curse, and the mystery of Tutankhamun's death. The black goo was treated as a bizarre footnote. But as science evolved, so did our ability to answer the big question. What exactly was this stuff made of? The investigation science confronts an ancient recipe. For decades, while the substance was known to be a ritual resin, its specific recipe was a bit of a puzzle. To find out, we have to leave the dusty tombs of Egypt and enter the clean, sterile world of the modern laboratory. Scientists at the British Museum and other institutions began to take a closer look at samples of this black goo, not just from Tutankhamun's tomb, but from other high-status burials where it was also used. This wasn't a practice strictly for kings. It was a ritual available to royalty and the wealthiest elites. To unlock its secrets, they turned to a powerful technique called gas chromatography mass spectrometry, or GCMS. Think of it like a high-tech prism for molecules. It takes a complex chemical mixture like the black goo and separates it into its individual ingredients. When the results came back, they were stunning. The black goo was a complex, sophisticated chemical cocktail. The analysis revealed a recipe made from a blend of plant oil, animal fat, and beeswax, but mixed with them were far more exotic substances. They found tree resin specifically from pine and pistacia trees. These resins were largely imported, likely from across the Mediterranean, a journey of hundreds of miles. But that's not all. One of the key ingredients identified in many of these concoctions is bitumen, a naturally occurring form of petroleum. Chemical markers in some samples strongly suggest a source that was famous in the ancient world: the Dead Sea. This wasn't some cheap local sealant. It was a deliberately crafted, expensive, and ritually important formula. But it wasn't a single, consistent recipe. Analyses show that the ingredients could vary, and the distinctive black color didn't always come from bitumen. Sometimes it was the result of the other resins and oils slowly breaking down and heating up over thousands of years. The science gave us the ingredient list for this sacred recipe. But it couldn't give us the why. Why go to all that trouble? To answer that, we have to do more than analyze molecules.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
We have to decode the symbols of the ancient Egyptian mind. The revelation, decoding the symbolism of black. In our modern world, the color black often carries negative connotations. But for the ancient Egyptians, black was one of the most powerful and positive colors imaginable. Their word for the color was kem. It was the same root they used for the name of their own country, Kemet, which translates to the Black Land. This wasn't a reference to their skin. It was a reference to the rich, dark, fertile silt deposited by the Nile River after its annual flood. This black soil was the source of all life in Egypt. Therefore, the color black kem was the color of fertility, regeneration, and rebirth. Now, let's turn to the central figure in the Egyptian afterlife, the god Osiris. Osiris was a king who was murdered and dismembered, only to be brought back to life by his wife, Isis. He then became the eternal lord of the underworld, the ultimate symbol of resurrection. And crucially, in Egyptian art, Osiris is almost always depicted with either green or black skin. He was often called the Black One. His black skin didn't mean death. It signified the regenerative power of the underworld. Suddenly, the pieces fall into place. Many Egyptologists now believe that by pouring this black goo over Tutankhamun's coffins and mummy, the priests were performing a profound act of magical transformation. They were ritually identifying the dead king with Osiris himself. The act of drenching the body in this black, life-giving liquid was symbolic of the Nile's flood covering the land in fertile silt. Some scholars even speculate that the chemical reaction of the ingredients may have been exothermic, meaning it produced heat. Imagine the priests, in the dark tomb, pouring this liquid and feeling it warm under their hands. To them, this might have been seen as a magical spark of life being infused into the king's form. This new understanding completely reframes what Howard Carter saw. From this perspective, the apparent destruction, the fusing of the amulets to the body, wasn't a mistake at all, it was a feature. By embedding the sacred objects directly into the hardened resin, they were making them a permanent and inseparable part of Tutankhamun's new, divine, Osirian body. What appeared to the 20th century archaeologist as a destructive mess was, to the 14th century BC priest, the ultimate act of creative magic. This incredible transformation, from seeing a destructive mess to understanding a profound ritual of rebirth, is what makes exploring ancient history so endlessly fascinating. The past is a puzzle, and with every new scientific tool we find another piece. If you agree, and you want to support more deep dives like this one, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell. It's a small click for you, but it truly helps us continue this journey into the mysteries of the past. The lingering mysteries and a darker legacy. While we now understand the goo's symbolic meaning, it hasn't answered every question. The sheer excess of the liquid, for example, is still debated. Some Egyptologists suggest it could be a sign of a rushed burial. Tutankhamun died young, at only 19, and his tomb is unusually small for a pharaoh. It's possible that in their haste, the priests simply dumped the remaining ritual unguents into the coffins. But there is a darker, more modern mystery that has emerged, one that shifts the focus from ancient priests to the celebrated discoverer himself. For decades, there were rumors that Howard Carter may have helped himself to some of the tomb's smaller treasures. Egyptian authorities at the time were deeply suspicious. For a long time it was just that, suspicion. But a century later, the evidence is almost impossible to ignore. An unpublished letter from 1934 has surfaced, written by Sir Alan Gardner, an expert Carter had hired to translate hieroglyphs. In the letter, Gardner confronts Carter. Carter had given him a beautiful amulet as a gift, assuring him it wasn't from the tomb. But when Gardner showed it to an expert, he was told it was a perfect match for other amulets from the burial, made from the same mold. Gardner wrote to Carter that the amulet was undoubtedly stolen from the tomb. This is the closest thing we have to a smoking gun, powerful evidence that the man who discovered the world's greatest treasure also secretly pocketed parts of it. This dark legacy adds another layer to the story. It shows that the mysteries of Tutankhamun's tomb are not all ancient. They are still unfolding today in museum archives and auction catalogs, as researchers try to piece back together the full picture of the king's burial, a picture that was altered not just by ancient priests, but by the very man who brought it to light. The story of the black goo is a journey from confusion to clarity. It begins with the image of a destructive, tar-like substance, poured with seemingly reckless abandon. For the archaeologists who found it, it looked like a ritual gone wrong. But through the lens of modern science and a deeper understanding of ancient belief, the picture has changed entirely. We now know it was often a complex and expensive formula, made with ingredients sourced from across the ancient world. It wasn't just tar. It was a sacred anointing liquid. And its purpose wasn't destructive. It was transformative. The black color, symbolizing the fertile soil of the Nile and the resurrected god Osiris, was meant to magically aid the dead pharaoh's rebirth into the lord of the underworld. The hardening of the resin, fusing amulets to the body, was a way to make that divine transformation permanent. The black goo covering King Tut's mummy wasn't there to destroy him. It was there to ensure that Tutankhamun would be reborn as Osiris, the eternal ruler of the afterlife. It reminds us that even when we think we see everything in a tomb of gold, the deepest secrets are often hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right tools and the right questions to finally bring them into the light.